Hello. Hey. Happy Star Wars Day. I'm prepared. At the bottom it says, Yo soy tu padre. I feel like it's fitting to merge Star Wars and Don Quixote together. It seems, it just seems right. Darth Coco. Exactly, exactly. uh, I'm so excited. Today we're starting part two. We have done 10 streams in part one, which is insane. 10 readings. Wild, wild. I don't remember how many we did for Jane Eyre, and I should have kept count because that was our longest book before. But I mean, we're going to surpass it. I mean, look at this. Look how much we still have to go. We're definitely surpassing how long Jane Eyre is. But it would have been fun to be like, woo! The little things make me so excited. It's chonky. It's very chonky. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you and all that goodness. Did anybody do anything to celebrate? Join any rebellions? Shoot down any Death Stars? I don't know. Find the plans for the Death Star and pass it along to Princess Leia? No? Uh, I have not started the new Star Wars game. I have not played the older one, Fallen Order. I need to. I need to play both of them. I'm watching right now, and I should just play. They look so fun. They look so good and also accessible. And I just need to remember that, like, if games are too hard, but I like am enjoying like the overall thing, to just change the difficulty level. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I don't need to beat this on like super extreme expert, you know. Nothing like that. It's just me and my nerdy enjoyment. Also, since they're canon, I feel like I need to play them, you know? I feel like Cal is gonna show up in some show or in some movie and reference something in the game, and I'm not gonna know what it is. So, I need to play them. Hey Noodles, good to see you. Happy May the 4th. Happy, happy. May the 4th be with you. My sister texted me at 7 a.m. this morning. May the 4th be with you. Mm-mm. Ridiculous. I mean, I was awake, but usually she texts me. We're in different time zones, and usually she texts me so early, and it's just upsetting. You're enjoying Jedi Survivor? Oh, so good, so good. I'm watching it. I need to play it. I know. I know. I haven't played Fallen Order, so I need to play both of them. But they look really, really fun. And like I just love that you can do like the dual sabers. Like it makes me so excited. It makes me so excited. Unreasonably excited. You know what? No. There's plenty of reason. Reasonably excited. Might do the game for all three of your weekly streams. Ooh, okay. That's right there. That's pretty high praise. All right. All right. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. I feel like the way I'm reacting is like you're arguing with me and you're totally not. Like, oh, I'm so excited. Yeah. So we'll have to do that. I'm reasonably excited. Just sounded nearly. You're right. You're right. I know. I know. You're totally right. As unreasonably excited, I'm reasonably excited. Oh, you got stuck traversing. Oh, but you got past it. You're a pro. You are a pro. You are a Jedi master. Oof. I did some yoga today. I went to a class and it was a hot yoga class, and I haven't done it in months, many a months. And um while it was happening, I was like, "Oh, this is so great. Why don't I do this anymore?" Mm-mm-mm. Like now, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the sore, which means tomorrow I'm gonna feel it, which means in 2 days it's gonna be like way worse. What is hot yoga? Okay. So it's like regular yoga, like yoga flow. So like not like necessarily just like holding positions for a really long time, but like it's a lot of like movement type deal. I mean, there are holds and stuff like that in the class that I do, but the room has added humidity and added heat to the point where like you walk into the room, you roll out your mat, and you're already really sweaty and disgusting. And it's supposed to be like really detoxing because you sweat so much and like rejuvenating that way. It is definite sauna vibes, yes. And I enjoy it because it is so much harder. Like you're breathing heavier because it's so hot. Everybody else is just as disgusting, if not more than you. So you don't have to feel bad about like being sweaty or like self-conscious or whatever. And also like because your muscles are so warm, you're like a little bit more bendy than you usually are, which when you haven't done it in a long time, it just means that you're going to be more sore because your limits are not quite what hot yoga will lead you to believe. All you've heard about hot yoga is jokes. There are, yes, there are lots of them. Lots of jokes, but I enjoy it. I like it. It's a good time. And the class that I go to, or the one that I went to today, was like a morning class, and it was like really busy. There was a lot of people in that little tiny room. And that helps at least for me, like when there's a lot of people who are also doing the same thing as you, it's like you're doing it together. Like even though you're not talking to anybody, you're like I do not talk to anybody. I'm not there for friendship. Um, but like you still have that like community feel of like, yes, me and all of these other people are doing it. We're seizing the day. We're stretching things out. But it's a good time. It's not for everybody. Absolutely not. It definitely like makes you really, really hungry and really, really thirsty. But getting back to it, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Um, reading updates. I haven't read anything. I know. Am I okay? Am I ill? Probably. You have so little mobility in your back. Yes, yes. Something like a gentle way to start stretching is just letting gravity do things for you. I am not certified in any way, so please do not take anything that I say as like this is the end all be all of what to do. Um, but like something that especially for like back is just like standing up and then just like bending forward and like not forcing to like touch the ground or like like reach your knees or like any like milestone, but just like letting gravity like hold you and like pull you down is helpful, and it's like more of a gentle way instead of like grabbing your ankles and like bending yourself in half and beyond half and whatever, which is insane. I can't do that. Nor do I think I want to do that. That's kind of weird. Okay. Today, we are starting part 2. And let me tell you, I'm excited. I'm so excited. Uh, this is how far we are. Things are happening. Where we left off, they are right back where they started, which is amazing. Amazing. Yeah, they're back at their village. The priest and the barber are going to try and keep Don Quixote there because they are concerned for his well-being and he's acting crazy and doing all these delusion or like going through with all of these delusions that he sees and everything like that. So they're trying to keep him there. And Sancho Panza is back and he's like talking with his wife about how he's a squire and like he's gonna have all of this land and he's gonna be the leader and like all of these things. And she's like, okay, but like, do you have anything now? Like, did you get shoes for your children? Did you get me a nice dress? Like, he's like, no, but it's coming, okay? It'll happen, all right? So I think that is where we left off. Yes. Yep, yep, yep. Cool. Part two. Part two, my friends. And it looks very uh ornate and stately. Let me just show you this page. It's like y'all made it. Look at that. So fancy. So pretty. It says second part of the ingenious gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, author of the first part. Dedicated to Don Pedro Fernandez de Castro, Count of Limos, Andrade, and Villalba, Marquis of Sarria, gentleman in waiting to His Majesty, commander of the jurisdiction of Peñafiel and La Zarza, member of the Order of Alcantara, Viceroy, Governor, and Captain General of the Kingdom of Naples, and President of the Supreme Council of Italy. To the Count of Limos. Some days ago, when I sent Your Excellency my plays, printed before they were performed, I said, if I remember correctly, that Don Quixote had his spurs ready to make the journey to kiss Your Excellency's hands, and now I say that he is wearing them, and is on his way, and if he arrives, it seems to me I will have performed a service for Your Excellency, because I have been urged on every side to send him forth in order to alleviate the loathing and disgust caused by another Don Quixote, who has traveled the world in the disguise of a second part. Playhard, thank you so much for the follow. Don Quixote, who has traveled the world in the disguise of a second part, and the person who has shown the deepest interest has been the great Emperor of China, who, not more than a month ago, sent an emissary with a letter for me in the Chinese language asking, or I should say begging, me to send the knight to him, because he wanted to establish a college in which the Castilian language would be read, and the book he wanted the students to read was the history of Don Quixote. That was all one large sentence. There is a note after in disguise of a second part, and it says, oh wait, there's another note. I missed the first note. Okay, so the first note is after to the Count of Limos, and it says, Don Pedro Fernandez Ruiz de Castro, 1576 to 1622, 7th Count of Limos, was the Viceroy of Naples from 1610 to 1616. He was patron to several writers, including Cervantes, who dedicated to him the novelas ejemplares, exemplary novels, in 1613, the comedias y extremices, plays and interludes, in 1615, the second part of Don Quixote, also in 1615, and Persiles y Sigismunda, a Byzantine novel, in 1616, 5 days before Cervantes' death. And then going back, the second note is after disguise of a second part, and it says, in 1614, what is generally known as the false Quixote appeared in Tarragona, Its title was the second volume of the ingenious gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. Its author has never been identified, though the book was published under the name of Alonso Fernandez de Avellaneda. I messed that up. A native of the town of Tordesillas. Cervantes apparently learned of its publication as he was writing chapter 59 of the authentic second part. El Falso Quixote. That's so interesting that somebody would write a second part. What? But why? Why would you do that? Is that like fan fiction? I don't understand. I don't know. He further said that he wanted me to be the rector of the college. I asked the bearer of the letter if His Majesty had given him anything that would help me to defray my expenses. He replied that it had not even occurred to him. Well, brother, I responded, you can go back to your China, covering your 10 leagues a day, or 20, or whatever you prefer, because my health is not good enough for me to undertake so long a journey. And not only am I ailing, but I am lacking in funds. And emperor for emperor, and monarch for monarch, in Naples I have the great Count of Lemos, who, without all the provisos of colleges and rectorship, sustains me and protects me, and does me more good turns than I could ever desire. With this I took my leave of him, and with this I take my leave now, offering to your excellencies the travails of Parcels and Sigismunda, a book that I will complete in 4 months. Dio volente, and it will be either the worst or best ever composed in our language. I mean, of those written for diversion. I must say I regret having said the worst, because in the opinion of my friends it is bound to reach the extremes of possible goodness. May your excellency enjoy all the good health we wish for you. Persiles will soon be ready to kiss your hands, and I your feet, being, as I am, the servant of your excellency. In Madrid, the last day of October, 1615. Your excellency's servant, Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Prologue to the reader. Lord save me. How impatiently you must be waiting for this prologue, illustrious or perhaps plebeian reader, believing you will find in it reprisals, quarrels. Oh my gosh, what is this word? Vituperations? That's a fun word that I've never seen before. Let's see. Vituperations. The act of vituperating. Duh. Severely blaming or censoring. Oh, that's fun. Okay. I'll start that sentence over. Lord, save me. How impatiently you must be waiting for this prologue, illustrious or perhaps plebeian reader, believing you will find in it reprisals, quarrels, and vituperations hurled at the author of the second Don Quixote. I mean the one sired in Tordesillas. They say, and born in Tarragona. And there's a note after Tarragona, and it says, despite his disclaimer, in his prologue, Cervantes obviously is responded to the prologue of the false Quixote. The greatest event to which Cervantes refers is the Battle of Lepanto, where he was wounded. Of a vituperative nature, not unreturbative. Thank you for clarifying, Wadsworth. But the truth is, I will not give you that pleasure, for although offenses awaken rage in the most humble hearts, In mine, this rule must find its exception. You would like me to call him an ass, a fool, an insolent dolt, but the thought has not even entered my mind. Let his sin be his punishment. Let him eat it with his bread, and let that be an end to it. What I do mind, however, is that he accuses me of being old and one-handed, as if it had been in my power to stop time and halt its passage, or as if it had been wounded in some tavern, and not at the greatest event ever seen in past or present times, or that future times can ever hope to see. If my wounds do not shine in the eyes of those who see them, they are, at least, esteemed by those who know where they are acquired. It seems better for a soldier to be dead in combat than safe in flight, and I believe this so firmly that even if I could achieve the impossible now, I would rather have taken part in that prodigious battle than to be free of wounds and not to have been there. The wounds on a soldier's face and bosom are stars that guide others to the heavens of honor and the desire to win glory, and it should be noted that one writes not with gray hairs, but with the understanding, which generally improves with the years. I am so sorry that he calls me envious and, as if I were an ignorant man, explains to me what envy is. But the fact is that of the two kinds of envy, I know only the one that is wholly noble and well-intentioned, and this being so, I do not need to persecute any priest, especially one who is a familiar of the Holy Office. If he said this in defense of the person on whose behalf he appears to have said it, he was entirely deceived, for I revere that person's genius and admire his works and continual and virtuous diligence. There is a note after Holy Office, and it says, in allusion to Lope de Vega, according to Avellaneda's prologue, Lope was unjustly attacked by Cervantes in the first part of Don Quixote. The protestations that follow here are pointedly disingenuous, for despite his being a priest, Lope de Vega's dissolute private life was common knowledge. But I do thank this worthy author for saying that although my novels are more satiric than exemplary, they are good, which they could not be if they were not good in every respect. I think you will say that I am showing great restraint and am keeping well within the bounds of modesty, knowing that one must not add afflictions to the afflicted, and the affliction of this gentleman is undoubtedly very great, for he does not dare to appear openly in the light of day, but hides his name and conceals his birthplace, as if he had committed some terrible act of treason against the crown. If you ever happen to meet him, tell him for me that I do not consider myself offended, for I know very well what the temptations of the devil are, and one of the greatest is to give a man the idea that he can compose and publish a book, and thereby win as much fame as fortune, as much fortune as fame. In confirmation of this, I should like you, using all your wit and charm, to tell him this story. In Seville there was a madman who had the strangest, most comical notion that any madman ever had. What he did was to make a tube out of a reed that he sharpened at one end, and then he would catch a dog on the street, or somewhere else, hold down one of its hind legs with his foot, lift the other with his hand, fit the tube into the right place, and blow until he had made the animal as round as a ball, and then, holding it up, he would give the dog 2 little pats on the belly and let it go, saying to the onlookers that there were always a good number of them. And there were always a good number of them. Now do your graces think it's an easy job to blow up a dog? Now does your grace think it's an easy job to write a book? And if that story does not please him, my dear reader, you can tell him this one, which is always about a madman and a dog. In Cordoba, in Cordoba, I mixed my D and my B. In Cordoba, there was a madman who was in the habit of carrying on his head a slab of marble, or a stone of no small weight, and when he came across an unwary dog, he would go up to the animal and drop the weight straight down on it. The dog would go into a panic and, barking and howling, run up 3 streets without stopping. Now, one of the dogs he dropped the weight on happened to belong to a haberdasher, and was much loved by its owner. A stone came down, hit the dog on the head, and the battered animal began to yelp and howl. Its master saw and heard this, and he seized a measuring stick, came after the madman, and beat him to within an inch of his life. And with each blow he said, "You miserable thief! You dog, why did you hurt my hound? Didn't you see, cruel man, that my dog was a hound?" And repeating the word hound over and over again, he beat and pummeled the madman. Chastised, the madman withdrew, and was not seen on the street for more than a month. But at the end of this time he returned with the same mad idea and an even heavier weight. He would go up to a dog, stare at it long and hard, and not wanting or daring to drop the stone, he would say, "This is a hound. Watch out." In fact, all the dogs he encountered, even if they were mastiffs or little lap dogs, he called hounds, and so he never dropped a stone on one again. Perhaps something similar may happen to this storyteller, who will not dare ever again to set his great talent loose among books, which, when they are bad, are harder than boulders. Tell him, too, that this threat to deprive me of profits with his book is something I do not care about at all, for in the words of the famous interlude, La Perendenga, I say, "Long live my Lord High Mayor, and the peace of Christ be with you all." And there is a note after La Perendenga, excuse me. There seems to be no information about this work, which was probably been lost. There is speculation that an interlude called La Perendeca, published in 1663 by Agustin Moredo, may be an adaptation of the one Cervantes had in mind. Long live the great Count of Lemos, whose well-known Christianity and liberality keep me standing in spite of all the blows struck by my bad fortune, and long live the supreme charity of His Eminence of Toledo, Don Bernardo de Sandoval y Rojas. Even if there were no more printing presses in the world, and even if more books were published against me than there are letters in the verses of Mingo Revolgo. Hey Star, welcome in. There are 2 notes. One is after Rojas. It says the Cardinal Archbishop of Toledo, Cervantes' protector. And then after Revolgo, it says a satirical work in verse written during the reign of Enrique IV, 1454 to 1474. It was widely circulated and immensely popular. These 2 princes have not received adulation from me or flattery, but moved only by their own goodness, they have undertaken to favor me with kindness, and for this I consider myself luckier and richer than if fortune had brought me to the heights by any ordinary means. A poor man may have honor, but not a villain. Need may cloud nobility, but not hide it completely. If virtue sheds her light, even along the crags and cracks of poverty, it will be esteemed by high, noble spirits, and so be favored. Say no more to him, and I do not wish to say more to you except to tell you to consider that this second part of Don Quixote, which I offer to you now, is cut by the same artisan and from the same cloth as the first. and in it I give you a somewhat expanded Don Quixote who is, at the end, dead and buried, so that no one will dare tell more tales about him, for the ones told in the past are enough, and it is also enough that an honorable man has recounted his clever follies and does not want to take them up again, for abundance, even of things that are good, makes people esteem them less, and scarcity, even of bad things, lends a certain value. I forgot to tell you to expect the parcels, which I am finishing now, and the second part of Galatea. And there is a note after Galatea, and it says, "This was never published, and if Cervantes in fact wrote it, the work has been lost." And that is the end of the note to the reader. Very interesting. So much drama that there is a false Quixote second part. And Don Quixote's like, okay, let me respond to this real quick. Also, way to throw in a spoiler, Don Quixote, saying, or Cervantes, saying that Quixote dies at the end so that nobody else can carry on his stories. Spoilers. Did we not believe in spoilers in the 1600s? Because we should have. Mm-mm-mm. Thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. It's this Sunday. I'm so excited. Okay, let's see what we got going on. Cool. 72%. Wow. Not too shabby, not too shabby. Book needs to be timed out for giving spoilers. Exactly. Exactly. The worst. The worst. Chapter 1. Regarding what transpired when the priest and the barber discussed his illness with Don Quixote. Little did he realize the false Quixote would just switch to prequels. Cid Hamete Benengeli tells us in the second part of this history, which recounts the third sally of Don Quixote, that the priest and the barber did not see the knight for almost a month in order to restore and bring back to his mind events of the past, but this did not stop them from visiting his niece and housekeeper, charging them to be sure to pamper him and give him food to eat that would strengthen and fortify his heart and brain, the source, as they had good reason to think, of all his misfortunes. The two women said that they already were doing so, and would continue to do so, as willingly and carefully as possible, because they could see that there were moments when their lord and master gave signs of being in his right mind. This made the priest and the barber extremely happy, for then it seemed to them that they had done the right thing by bringing him home, enchanted, in the ox cart, as recounted in the final chapter of the first part of this great and accurate history. And so they decided to visit him and see his improvement for themselves, although they considered a complete cure almost impossible, and they agreed not to make any mention at all of knight-errantry, so as not to run the risk of reopening his wounds, which were still so fresh. Don Quixote apparently had an illustrious pod racing career as a child. Man, who would have thought? Not I. Where are the younglings? Midi-chlorians. Off the chart. In short, they visited him and found him sitting up in bed, dressed in the green flannel vest he wore under his armor, and a red Toledan cap, and looking so dry and gaunt that he seemed to be a mummy. They received a warm welcome. They asked after his health, and he accounted for himself and the state of his health with very good judgment, and in very elegant words. And in the course of their conversation they began to discuss what is called reason of state and ways of governing, correcting the abuse and condemning that one, reforming one custom and eliminating another. Each one of the three becoming a new legislator, a modern Lycurgus, a latter-day Solon, and they so transformed the nation that it seemed as if they had placed it in the forge and taken out a new one, and Don Quixote spoke with so much intelligence regarding all the subjects they touched upon that his two examiners thought there was no doubt that he was completely well and his sanity restored. And there is a note after a latter-day Solon, and it says, famous legislators of ancient Sparta and Athens, respectively. The niece and housekeeper were present at this conversation, and they never tired of giving thanks to God at seeing their lord and master with all his wits. The priest, however, changing his earlier intention, which was not to touch on chivalric matters, wanted a more thorough test of whether or not Don Quixote's recovery was false or true. And so he gradually began to recount news of the court, and among other things he said it was thought certain that the Turk would come down with a powerful fleet, but no one knew his plans or where the huge cloud would burst. This fear, which has us on the alert almost every year, had now affected all the Christendom, and his Majesty had fortified the coasts of Naples and Sicily and the island of Malta, to which Don Quixote responded, His Majesty has behaved like a most prudent warrior by fortifying his states in good time, so that the enemy will not find them unprepared. But if he were to take my advice, I would counsel him to take a precautionary measure that his Majesty is very far from considering at present. As soon as the priest heard this, he said to himself, May God hold you in his hands, my poor Don Quixote, for it seems to me you have leaped from the high peak of your madness into the profound abyss of your foolishness. But Barber, who had already had the same thought as the priest, asked Don Quixote to tell him the precautionary measure he thought it would be good to undertake. Perhaps it might be put on the list of the many impertinent proposals that are commonly offered to princes. Mine, Señor Shaver, said Don Quixote, is not impertinent, but completely pertinent. I don't say it isn't, replied the barber, but experience shows that all or most of the schemes presented to his Majesty are either impossible, or absurd, or harmful to the king and his kingdom. Well, mine, responded Don Quixote, is neither impossible nor absurd, but is, rather, the easiest, most just, most practical, and shrewdest that has ever occurred to any planner. Your Grace is slow in telling us what it is, Señor Don Quixote, said the priest. I would not want, said Don Quixote, to state it here and now, and tomorrow have it find its way to the ears of the king's advisers, so that another receives the thanks and rewards for my labors. As far as I am concerned, said the barber, I will give my word, here and before God, not to repeat what your Grace would tell the king or the rook or any man on earth, a vow I learned in the tale of the priest, who in the preface told the king about the thief who had stolen 100 dobles from him, as well as his mule and the ambling gate, with the ambling gate. And by ambling, I mean ambling. And there's a note after Tale of the Priest, and it says, the reference is to a well-known popular tale. That's all you get. I know nothing of stories, said Don Quixote, but I do know this is a good vow because I know the barber is a trustworthy man. Even if he were not, said the priest. "I would vouch for him and guarantee that in this case he will say no more than if he were mute, under pain of sentence by the court." "And who vouches for your grace, Señor Priest?" said Don Quixote. "My profession," responded the priest, "which is to keep secrets." "By my faith," Don Quixote said then, "what else can his majesty do but command by public proclamation that on a specific day all the knights-errant wandering through Spain are to gather at court, and even if no more than half a dozen were to come, there might be one among them who could, by himself, destroy all the power of the Turk? Your graces should listen carefully and follow as I say. Is it by any chance surprising for a single knight-errant to vanquish an army of 200,000 men, as if all of them together had but one throat, or were made of sugar candy? Tell me, then, how many histories are filled with such marvels? If only, to my misfortune, if not to anyone else's, the famous Don Belianis were alive today, or any one of the countless descendants of Amadis of Gaul. If any of them were here today and confronted the Turk, it would not be to his advantage. But God will look after his people and provide one who, if not as excellent as the knights-errant of old, at least will not be inferior to them in courage. God understands me, and I shall say no more." "Oh," said the niece at this point, "you can kill me if my uncle doesn't want to be a knights-errant again." To which Don Quixote said, "I shall die a knight-errant, and let the Turk come down or go up wherever he wishes, and however powerfully he can. Once again I say that God understands me." And then the barber said, "I beg your graces to give me leave to tell a brief story that occurred in Sevilla, since it is very much to the point here. I should like to tell it now." Don Quixote gave his permission, and the priest and the others listened carefully, and the barber began in this manner. In the madhouse in Sevilla there was a man whose relatives had put him there because he had lost his reason. He was a graduate in canon law from Osuna, but even if he had graduated from Salamanca, in the opinion of many he would not have been any less mad. This graduate, after some years of confinement, came to believe that he was sane, and in his right mind, and with this thought he wrote to the Archbishop earnestly, entreating him in carefully choosing phrases, to have him removed from the misery in which he was living, for through God's mercy he had now recovered his reason, but his relatives, in order to enjoy his share of the estate, were keeping him there, and despite the truth would have wanted him mad until his death. The Archbishop, persuaded by his many well-written and well-reasoned letters, ordered one of his chaplains to learn from the superintendent of the madhouse if what the licentiate had written was true, and to speak to the madman as well, and, if it seemed he was in his right mind, to release him and set him free. The chaplain did so, and the superintendent told him that the man was still mad. Though he often spoke like a person of great intelligence, he eventually would begin to say countless foolish things, as many and as deeply felt as his earlier rational statements, and this the chaplain could see for himself if he spoke to him. The chaplain agreed, visited the madman, spoke to him for more than an hour, and in all that time the madman never made a confused or foolish statement. Rather, he spoke so judiciously that the chaplain was obliged to believe that the madman was sane. One of the things the madman told him was that the superintendent bore him ill will because he did not want to lose the gifts his relatives gave him for saying he was still mad. Though with periods of lucidity, the greatest obstacle for him in his misfortune was his wealth, because in order to enjoy it, his enemies were deceptive, and denied the mercy our Lord had shown by turning him from a beast back into a man. In short, what he said depicted the superintendent as suspect, his relatives as greedy and heartless, and himself as so reasonable that the chaplain resolved to take him back so that the archbishop could see the truth of the matter for himself. With this virtuous intention, the good chaplain asked the superintendent to return the clothes the licentiate had been wearing when he was first admitted. Again, the superintendent told him to think about what he was doing, because there was no doubt that the licentiate was still mad. The superintendent's warning and admonitions were in vain. The chaplain insisted on taking him away. The superintendent obeyed, since it was by order of the archbishop, and the licentiate was dressed in his clothes, which were new and decent, and when he saw himself in the raiment of a sane man, and no longer wearing the clothing of a madman, he asked the chaplain to please give him permission to say goodbye to his mad companions. The chaplain said that he wished to accompany him and see the madmen who were in the hospital, and so they went up, along with some of the other people. And when the licentiate reached a cage that held a raving maniac who was, however, calm and quiet for the moment, he said, "Brother, see if there is anything you wish to ask of me, for I am going home. God, in his infinite goodness and mercy, though I do not deserve it, has been pleased to restore my reason to me. Now I am healthy and sane. Nothing is impossible for the power of God. Place your hope and trust in him, for as he has returned me to my earlier state, he will do the same for you if you trust in him. I will be sure to send you some good things to eat, and eat them you must, for I say that I believe, as one who has experienced it himself, that all our madness comes from having our stomachs empty and our heads full of air. Take heart, take heart. Despondency in misfortune lessens one's health and hastens death." Another madman who was in a cage, facing the cage of the first maniac, heard everything the licentiate said, and he got up from an old mat where he had been lying naked and asked in a shout who it was that was leaving healthy and sane. The licentiate responded, "It is I, brother, who am leaving. I no longer have any need to be here, and for that I give infinite thanks to heaven for the mercy it has shown me." "Think about what you're saying, licentiate. Don't let the devil deceive you," replied the madman. "Keep your feet still and stay peacefully in your house, and you'll save yourself the trouble of having to come back." "I know I am cured," replied the licentiate, "and will not have to do any of this again." "You, cured?" said the madman. "Well, well, time will tell. Go with God, but I vow by Jupiter, whose majesty I represent on earth, that on account of the sin that Sevilla commits today by taking you out of this madhouse and calling you sane, I must inflict on her a punishment so severe that its memory will endure for an eternity. Amen. And don't you know, you miserable little licentiate, that I can do it? For, as I have said, I am Jupiter, the Thunderer, and in my hands I hold the flaming thunderbolts, with which I can threaten and destroy the world. But I wish to punish this ignorant city with only one thing. I will not reign on it or its environs for 3 whole years, which will be counted from the day and hour when the threat was made. You free and healthy and sane, while I am mad and sick and confined. I would just as soon reign as hang myself." Those who were nearby heard the shouts and the words of the madmen, but our licentiate, turning to the chaplain and grasping his hands, said, "Your Grace should not be concerned by or pay attention to what this madman has said, for if he is Jupiter and does not wish to reign, I, who am Neptune, father and god of waters, shall reign whenever I please, and whenever it is necessary." To which the chaplain replied, "Even so, Signor Neptune, it would not be a good idea to anger Signor Jupiter. Your Grace should stay in your house, and another day, when it is more convenient and there is more time, we shall come back for your Grace." The superintendent and the bystander all laughed, and their laughter mortified the chaplain. They stripped the licentiate, who remained in the madhouse, and that was the end of his story. Well, Senor Barber, this is the story, said Don Quixote. So much to the point that you had to tell it? Ah, Senor Shaver, how blind must one be not to see through a sieve? Is it possible your grace does not know what comparisons of intelligence, or valor, or beauty, or lineage are always hateful and badly received? I, Signor Barber, am not Neptune, the god of waters, nor do I attempt to persuade anyone that I am clever when I am not. I only devote myself to making the world understand its error in not restoring that happiest of times when the order of knight-errantry was in flower. But our decadent age does not deserve to enjoy the good that was enjoyed in the days when knights-errant took it as their responsibility to bear on their own shoulders the defense of kingdoms, the protection of damsels, the safeguarding of orphans and wards, the punishment of the proud, and the rewarding of the humble. Most knights today would rather rustle in damasks, brocades, and the other rich fabrics of their clothes that creak in chain mail. No longer do knights sleep in the fields, subject to the rigors of heaven, wearing all their armor from head to foot. No longer does anyone, with his feet still in the stirrups and leaning on his lance, catch 40 winks, as they say, as the knights errant used to do. No longer does anyone ride out to this forest and into those mountains, and from there tread upon a bare and desolate beach, the sea most often stormy and tempestuous, and find along the shore a small boat without oars, sail, mast, or any kind of rigging, and with intrepid heart climb in, and give himself over to the implacable waves of the deeper ocean, which first raise him up to the heaven, and then toss him into the abyss, and, with his breast turned to the insurmountable storm, when he least expects it, he will find himself more than 3,000 leagues distant from the place where he embarked, and he leaps out of the boat onto a distant unknown land, and there things occur that are worthy of being written not on parchment, but bronze. Now, however, sloth triumphs over diligence, idleness over work, vice over virtue, arrogance over valor, and theory over the practice of arms, which lived and shone only in the golden age and in the time of the knights errant. If you do not agree, then tell me, who was more virtuous and valiant than the famed Amadis of Gaul? Who more intelligent than Palmerin of England? Who more accommodating and good-natured than tyrant Leblanc? Who more gallant than Lisuarte of Greece? Who more combative with the sword than Don Belianis? Who more intrepid than Perion of Gaul? Who more audacious in the face of danger than Felix Marte of Hyrcania? Who more sincere than Esplandian? Who bolder than Don Cirongilio of Thrace? Oh my gosh, the names. And they just keep going. Who more courageous than Rodomonte? Who more prudent than King Sobrino? Who more daring than Rinaldos? Who more invincible than Roland? And who more elegant and courteous than Ruggiero, from whom the modern-day dukes of Ferrara are descended, according to Turpin in his Cosmography? All these knights, and many others I could mention, Señor Priest, were knights errant, the light and glory of chivalry. They, or knights like them, are the ones I would like for my scheme. If they were part of it, His Majesty would be well served and save a good deal of money, and the Turk would be left tearing his beard. Therefore, I shall remain in my house, since the chaplain has not taken me out of it, and if his Jupiter, as the barber has said, does not reign, here I am, and I shall reign whenever I please. I say this so that Señor Basin will know I understand him. The truth is, Señor Don Quixote, said the barber, This is not why I told you the story. And as God is my witness, my intentions were good, and your grace should not be offended. I know very well, responded Don Quixote, whether or not I should be offended. At this juncture the priest said, although I have hardly said a word until now, I should like to express some misgivings that are gnawing and scratching at my conscience, and were caused by what Señor Don Quixote said here. The Señor Priest has permission The Señor Priest has permission for many things, responded Don Quixote, and so he may state his misgivings, for it is not pleasant to have a conscience filled with them. Well, having received this approval, responded the priest, I say that these are my misgivings. I am not at all convinced that this crowd of knights-errant to whom your grace, Señor Don Quixote, has referred, were really and truly persons of flesh and blood who lived in the world. Rather, I imagine they are all fiction, fable, falsehoods, dreams told by men when they are awake, or, I should say, half asleep. That is another error, responded Don Quixote, into which many have fallen. They do not believe that such knights ever existed in the world, and with a variety of people and on different occasions, I have often attempted to bring this common misconception into the light of truth. Sometimes I have not succeeded in my intention, and at other times I have, supporting it on the shoulders of truth, and this truth is so certain, I can almost say I have seen Amadis of Gaul with my own eyes, tall, with a pale face and nicely trimmed black beard, with a gaze both gentle and severe. He was a man of few words, slow to anger and quick to put aside wrath, and just as I have depicted Amadis, I could, I believe, portray and describe all the knights-errant who wander through all the histories in the world, because it is my understanding that they were just as their histories recount, and by means of the deed they performed and the circumstances in which they lived, and by using sound philosophy, one can deduce their features, their natures, and their stature. Then how tall does your grace, Señor Don Quixote, asked the barber, think the giant Morgante was? In the matter of giants, responded Don Quixote, there are different opinions as to whether or not they ever existed in the world, but Holy Scripture, which cannot deviate an iota from the truth, shows us that they did by telling us the history of that huge Philistine Goliath, whose stature was 7.5 cubits, which is inornately tall, and on the island of Sicily, shin bones and shoulder bones have been discovered, which are so large that it is clear they belonged to giants as tall as a tall tower. Geometry proves this truth beyond any doubt, but despite all this, I could not say with certainty how big Morgante was, though I imagine he was not very tall. I am of this opinion because in his history, when there is particular mention of his deeds, he often was sleeping under a roof, and since he could find a house large enough to hold him, it is obvious his size was not exceptional. That is true, said the priest, who enjoyed hearing so much foolishness, and asked his feelings with regard to the appearance of Rinaldo de Montalban, Don Ronald, and the other 12 peers of France, for they all had been knights-errant. With respect to Rinaldo's, responded Don Quixote, I dare say his face was broad and ruddy, his eyes merry and rather prominent, his temperament exceedingly punctilious and choleric, and that he was a friend of thieves and other dissolute people. With respect to Roland, or Roldan, or Rotolando, or Orlando, for he is called all these names in histories, I believe, and declare that he was of medium height, broad-shouldered, somewhat bow-legged, with a dark complexion and a blond beard, a hairy body and a threatening demeanor, a man of few words, but very courteous and well-bred. If Roland was not more of a gentleman than your grace has indicated, said the priest, it is not surprising that Signora Angelica the fair scorned him and left him for the elegance, spirit, and charm that the downy-cheeked Moorish lad to whom she gave herself must have possessed, and she was wise to fall madly in love with Medoro's gentleness rather than Roland's harshness. Angelica, Senor Priest, responded Don Quixote, was a pleasure-seeker, a gadabout, and a somewhat capricious damsel, and she left the world as full of her impertinences as it was filled with the fame of her beauty. She scorned 1,000 brave and intelligent gentlemen, and was satisfied with a little beardless page who had no property or name other than a reputation for gratitude because of his loyalty to a friend. The great singer of her beauty, the famous Ariosto, did not dare or wish to sing what happened to the lady after she so ruinously gave herself to Medoro, for they could not have been overly virtuous things, and he left her at the point where he says, "And of how she gained the sceptre of Cathay, perhaps another will sing in a better style." And after those two lines, there is a note that says, "The second line, in Italian, closes part one of Don Quixote." That's fun. And no doubt this is of a kind of prophecy. Poets are called vates, which means they are soothsayers. This truth can be clearly seen because since then a famous Andalusian poet wept over and sang of her tears, and another famous and unique Castilian poet sang of her beauty. And there's a note after of her beauty, and it says, the first poet is Luis Barahona de Soto, who wrote Las Lágrimas de Angelica, the Tears of Angelica. The second is Lope de Vega, who wrote La Hermosura de Angelica, the beauty of Angelica. Tell me, Senor Don Quixote, said the barber, among all those who praised her, hasn't there ever been a poet who wrote a satire of this Signora Angelica? There's a note after Signora Angelica. It says, subsequent to the publication of Part 2, both Gongora and Quevedo wrote satires of the epic of Charlemagne, including the love of Roland and Angelica, which had been so popular in the early Renaissance. I love all of these real life, real world references that are so seamlessly embedded into Don Quixote. And that's just really cool. And I'm so happy that there are so many footnotes because I wouldn't have known like any of these. No. So that's really nice. It helps give a better appreciation for Cervantes' work. I do believe, responded Don Quixote, that if Sacripante or Roland had been poets, they would already have reprimanded the damsel as she deserved, because it is right and natural for poets who have been scorned and rejected by their imagined ladies, or by the imagined ladies of the character they had created in their works, whom they have chosen as the mistresses of their thoughts, to take their revenge with satires and attacks, a revenge most certainly unworthy of generous hearts. But until now I have not heard a single verse attacking Signora Angelica, who turned the world upside down. Miraculous, said the priest. And at this point they heard the housekeeper and niece, who had already abandoned the conversation, shouting in the courtyard, and they all hurried to the site of the noise. End of chapter 1. Alright, so this chapter, we get a story from the barber, which is very parallel to the story of Don Quixote. And Don Quixote is like, I'm not dumb. I know what you're trying to say. I'm not crazy, and I'm not this person that you're trying to compare me to. And the barber is like, that's not what I'm trying to do. You have you have misread the situation, even though that's obviously what he's trying to do. And so Don Quixote also says that he has like a plan. He has a plan for the king, and if the king does this, then obviously we will beat all of the Turks. And the priest and the barber are sort of trying to ask very pointed questions to prove that the knights are not real, and saying like, well, what did this person look like? How tall was this giant? Like that sort of thing. And Don Quixote has an answer for everything. He's very good at, sorry, my pin is just like super not enjoying the light. He's super great at answering questions. And of course he is. Um there's something else I was gonna say, and then I got distracted by the light shining off of my pin. I don't remember. I don't know. It's fine. It's fine. If it's important, I'll think of it later. Okay. Chapter 2, which deals with the notable dispute that Sancho Panza had with Don Quixote's niece and housekeeper, as well as other amusing topics. You have to wonder, were the tales of knights of yore real or just mostly fabricated tales? That is that is an interesting question. Absolutely. And I mean, you think about who is, telling the tales or writing the tales, usually the people who win. And I'm sure that like details are heightened and glorified and just uh exaggerated so much. And I'm wondering if at the like core of each story there is like a bit of truth, but like the stories that we're hearing and like have heard of and are being portrayed even today are just maybe so different and so far removed from what actually happened. That's super interesting though. Like, what is the fiction? What is the nonfiction? Yeah, the knights of yore. Mm, I remembered what else I was gonna say. And Don Quixote brings up, like, I don't want to live in a world where there aren't knights. I want to have this place where people go exploring, where people go into the fields and into the mountains and they cross rivers and everything like that instead of just staying inside, which is also really interesting. Like, that's great that that's the aspect that you want to keep going, and this is how, like, he's doing it and keeping it real and alive. And oh, all of the chivalry. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, all of the extra stuffs. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know, and I really, yeah, I don't know. Mm. Have not read much about like night time period, fiction or nonfiction, so I really don't know, and that's interesting. Let's wonder that together. All right, chapter 2, which deals with the notable dispute that Sancho Panza had with Don Quixote's niece and housekeeper, as well as other amusing topics. Our history recounts that the cries heard by Don Quixote, the priest, and the barber came from the niece and housekeeper, and were directed at Sancho Panza, who was struggling to come in to see Don Quixote while they barred his way, shouting, "What does this vagabond want in our house? Go back home, brother, for you and nobody else lead our master astray and lure him out of this house, and take him to those God-forsaken places. To which Sancho responded, Housekeeper from hell, the one who lured and led astray and taken for God-forsaken places, not your master. He led me everywhere, and you two are deceived, and are blaming the wrong person. He lured me out of my house with tricks and lies, promising me an insula that I'm still waiting for. I hope you choke on those damned insulas, Sancho, you wretch, responded the niece. And what are insulas? Something to eat? You greedy glutton. It's not something to eat, replied Sancho, but something to govern and rule better than any town council or magistrate in criminal court. Even so, said the housekeeper, you won't come in, you bag of evil and sack of wickedness. Go and govern your own house, and work your parcel of land, and stop trying to rule insulas, or insulos, or whatever you call them. The priest and the barber were delighted to hear this three-way conversation, but Don Quixote, fearful that Sancho would blurt out and disclose a quantity of malicious nonsense and touch on points that would not redound to his credit, called to him and made the two women be quiet and allow him to enter. Sancho came in, and the priest and the barber took their leave of Don Quixote in despair over his health, for they saw how fixed his foolish ideas were, and how enthralled he was by the nonsense of this calamitously errant chivalry. And so the priest said to the barber, You'll see, compadre, that when we least expect it, our gentleman will leave again and beat the bushes, putting all the birds to flight. I've no doubt about that, responded the barber, but I'm not as astounded by the madness of the knight as I am by the simplicity of the squire, who has so much faith in the story of the insulas that I don't believe all the disappointments imaginable will ever get it out of his head. May God help them, said the priest, and let us be on the alert. We'll see where all the foolishness in this knight and squire will lead, because it seems as if both were made from the same mold, and that the madness of the master, without the simplicity of the servant, would not be worth anything. That's true, said the barber, and I'd certainly like to know what they're talking about now. I assure you, responded the priest, that the niece or the housekeeper will tell us later, because they're not the kind not to eavesdrop. In the meantime, Don Quixote had taken Sancho into his room and closed the door, and when they were alone, he said, It grieves me, Sancho, that you have said and still say that I lured you away, knowing that I did not remain in my own house. We went out together, we left together, and we travelled together. Together we shared a single fortune and a single fate. If you were tossed in a blanket once, I was battered and bruised 100 times, and that is the one advantage I have over you. What an advantage to have. That was right and proper, responded Sancho, because, according to your grace, misfortunes afflict knights-errant more than their squires. You are wrong, Sancho, said Don Quixote. As the saying goes, Quando caput dolet. I don't understand any language but my own, responded Sancho. He is never gonna get over that blanket incident. But, like, remember the time that I was in the blanket? Remember that time? Sancho, you will not let us forget about the time in the blanket. I mean, said Don Quixote, that when the head aches, all the other members ache too. Since I am your lord and master, I am your head, and you are my part, for you are my servant. For this reason, the evil that touches or may touch me will cause you pain, and yours will do the same to me. That's how it should be, said Sancho. But when they tossed me, a member, in the blanket, my head was behind the fence watching me fly through the air and not feeling any pain at all. Since the members are obliged to suffer the pains of the head should be obliged to feel their pains too. Do you mean to say, Sancho, responded Don Quixote, that I felt no pain when you were tossed in the blanket. If that is what you mean, do not say it and do not think it, for at the time I felt more pain in my spirit than you did in your body. But let us put that aside for now. There will be time for us to ponder this and draw the proper conclusion. Tell me, Sancho, my friend, what are people saying about me in the village? What opinion of me do the commoners have, and the gentlefolk, and the knights? What do they say of my valor, my deeds, and my courtesy? What is the talk with regards to my undertakings to revive and bring back to the world the forgotten order of chivalry? In short, Sancho, I want you to tell me what has reached your ears regarding this, and you must tell me without adding anything to the good or taking anything away from the bad, for it is fitting not loyal vassals tell the exact and unvarnished truth to their lords, not swelling it because of adulation or allowing any other idle considerations to lessen it. And I want you to know, Sancho, that if the naked truth, bare of flattery, were to reach the ears of princes, the times would be different, and other ages would be deemed to be of iron when compared to our own, which, I believe, would be considered golden. Heed this warning, Sancho, and with good sense and intentions bring to my ears the truth of what you know in response to what I have asked you. I will do that gladly, señor, responded Sancho, on the condition that your grace will not be angry at what I say, since you want me to tell the naked truth and not dress it in any clothes except the ones it was wearing when I heard it. Under no circumstances shall I be angry, responded Don Quixote. You may certainly speak freely, Sancho, without evasions. Well, the first thing I'll say, he said, is that the common people think your grace is a great madman, and that I'm just as great a simpleton. The gentry say you have not stayed within the bounds of being a gentleman, and have called yourself Don, and rushed into being a knight when you have just a vine or two and a couple of fields, and nothing but rags on your back. And there is a note after Don, and it says the honorific Don, or Doña, was supposed to be used only with specific ranks of nobility, though many people added the title to their names without having any right to it. The knights say they wouldn't want the minor gentry to compete with them, especially those squirish gentlefolk who polish their shoes with lamp black and bend their black stockings with green thread. That, said Don Quixote, has nothing to do with me, because I am always well dressed, and never in patches. My clothes may be frayed, but more by my armor than by time. As for your grace's valor, courtesy, deeds, and undertakings, Sancho continued, there are different opinions. Some say, crazy but amusing. Others, brave but unfortunate. And others, courteous but insolent. And they go on so much in this vein that they don't leave an untouched bone in your grace's body or mine. Look, Sancho, said Don Quixote, wherever extraordinary virtue resides, there it is persecuted. Very few, if any, of the famous men of the past escaped the slanders of the wicked. Julius Caesar, that most spirited, prudent, and valiant captain, was called ambitious, and not particularly clean in his clothing or habits. Alexander, whose feats earned him the title of Great, was said to have been something of a drunkard. Hercules, with all his labors, was called lascivious and soft. Don Galaor, the brother of Amadis, was whispered to be more than a little quarrelsome, and his brother was called Tearful. And so, dear Sancho, with so many calumnies directed against good men, let them say what they wish about me, as long as there is no more than what they have told me. That's the problem, I swear by my father, replied Sancho. Then there is more? Asked Don Quixote. And something much worse, said Sancho. So far, it's been nothing but child's play. But if your grace wants to know all the slander they're saying about you, I'll bring somebody here who will tell you everything and not leave out a crumb. Last night, Bartolome Carrasco's son, who's been studying at Salamanca, came home with his bachelor's degree, and I went to welcome him home, and he told me that the history of your grace is already in books, and it's called The Ingenious Gentleman, Don Quixote of La Mancha. And he says that in it they mention me, Sancho Panza, by name, and my lady Dulcinea of Toboso, and other things that happened when we were alone, so that I crossed myself in fear at how the historian who wrote them could have known about them. I assure you, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that the author of our history must be some wise enchanter, for nothing is hidden from them if they wish to write about it. Well, said Sancho, if he was wise and an enchanter, then how is it possible, according to what Bachelor Sanson Carrasco says, for that's the name of the person I was telling you about, that the author of the history is named Cid Hamete Berenjena. That may or may not be his name. What is a Moorish name? That is a Moorish name, responded Don Quixote. It must be, responded Sancho, because I've heard that most Moors are very fond of eggplant. There is a note after eggplant, and it says, oh my gosh, okay. See note 6, chapter 9, part 1, for a discussion of the Moorish author's name. Oh my gosh, why can't they give me a page number? I don't want to go all the way over there. Okay, thank you, Wadsworth. I have never had to say eggplant in Spanish. And that also makes everything way funnier. Not sure about that in the context of Moors and eggplants. Fair, fair. Duddy, hello. Good to see you. Sancho wants his cut. I mean, have you heard? He's been tossed around in a blanket. These choose your own adventures are getting so complicated. You must be mistaken, Sancho, said Don Quixote. And the last name of this Cid, which in Arabic means señor. That may be, replied Sancho, but if your grace would like me to bring Sanson Carrasco here, I'll go find him right away. I would like that very much, my friend, said Don Quixote. What you have told me has left me in suspense, and nothing I eat will taste good until I learn everything. Then I'll go for him now, responded Sancho. And leaving his master, he went to find the bachelor, with whom he returned in a very short while, and the three of them had a most amusing conversation. That's weird. Twitch doesn't have an eggplant emote? I can understand why, but I'm also very surprised. Oh, there we go. Duddy coming in hot. That's the end of chapter 2. Ugh, I. Oh, those look like little jelly beans with little hats. Little jelly beans with hats. Oh man. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this chapter, Sancho is like, dude, people are talking about you. And Don Quixote's like, tell me. And then Sancho's like, you're not gonna like it. And Don Quixote's like, I don't care. Tell me. And then Sancho's like, okay, so everybody's saying all of these things about you, that you're crazy, blah, 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 blah. But also, there's a book written about you, about me, about Lady Dulcinea of Toboso. And so now he just ran off to go find this guy with a bachelor's degree to relate what Sancho just said, but like with more detail. Wild. Wild. So is part this is like so like meta and Inception. Like is part 1 what they're talking about? The part that's been written and is like circulating? Is that what's happening? This is crazy. I'm enjoying it. All right. I guess we'll just have to find out. All these questions will be answered once we just keep reading. I know. I know. I know this, and yet I ask the questions anyway. All right. Chapter 3. Regarding the comical discussion held by Don Quixote, Sancho Panza, and bachelor Sansón Carrasco. Don Quixote was extremely thoughtful as he awaited bachelor Carrasco, from whom he hoped to hear the news about himself that had been put into a book, as Sancho had said, though he could not persuade himself that such a history existed, for the blood of the enemies he had slain was not yet dry on the blade of his sword, and his chivalric exploits were already in print. Even so, he imagined that some wise man, either a friend or an enemy, by the arts of enchantment, had printed them, if a friend, in order to elevate them and raise them above the most famous deeds of any knight-errant; if an enemy, to annihilate them, and place them lower than the basest acts ever attributed to the basest squire. Although, he said to himself, the acts of squires were never written down, if such a history did exist, because it was about a knight-errant, it would necessarily be grandiloquent, noble, distinguished, magnificent, and true. This gave him some consolation, but it made him disconsolate to think that its author was a Moor, as suggested by the name Cid, and one could not expect truth from the Moors, because all of them are tricksters, liars, and swindlers. He feared his love had been treated with an indecency that would redound to the harm and detriment of the modesty of his lady Dulcinea of Toboso. He earnestly hoped there had been a declaration of the fidelity and decorum with which he had always behaved towards her, disdaining queens, empresses, and maidens of all ranks, and keeping at bay the force of his natural passions, and so, wrapped and enwrapped in these and many other thoughts, he was found by Sancho and Carrasco, whom Don Quixote received with great courtesy. The bachelor, though his name was Sansón, was not particularly large, but he was immensely sly. His color was pale, but his intelligence was very bright. He was about 24 years old, with a round face, a snub nose, and a large mouth, all signs of a mischievous nature, and a fondness for tricks and jokes, which he displayed then, when, upon seeing Don Quixote, he kneeled before him, and said, "Your magnificence, Señor Don Quixote of La Mancha, give me your hand, for by the habit of St. Peter, what I wear, though I have taken only the first 4 orders, your grace is one of the most famous knights-errant there ever was, or will be, anywhere on this round earth." And there are a couple notes. One of them is after Sansón, and it says Sansón is the Spanish equivalent of Samson. And the note after St. Peter that I wear says the ordinary clothing of the clergy and of scholars. The term is used here mockingly, as if it were the habit of one of the great military orders, such as the Order of Santiago, St. James. Blessings on Cid Hamante Benengeli, who wrote the history of your great deeds, and double blessings on the inquisitive man who had it translated from Arabic into our vernacular Castilian, for the universal entertainment of all people. Don Quixote had him stand, and said, So then, is it true that my histories exist, and that it is composed by a wise Moor? It is so true, señor, said Sanson, that I believe there are more than 12,000 copies of this history in print today. If you do not think so, let Portugal, Barcelona, and Valencia tell you so, for they were printed there. There is even a rumor that it is being printed in Antwerp, and it is evident to me that every nation or language will have its translation of the book. And there is a note right where we left off, and it says, Part 1 had been printed 3 times in Madrid, twice in 1605, once in 1608, twice in Lisbon, 1605, twice in Valencia, also in 1605, twice in Brussels, 1607 and 1611, and once in Milan, 1610, when Cervantes probably wrote these lines. It did not appear in Barcelona until 1617, when the first and second parts were printed together for the first time, or in Antwerp until 1673. It is assumed that Cervantes wrote Antwerp instead of Brussels. All of these editions are in Spanish. The first translation of the book into English by Thomas Shelton appeared in London in 1612. There you go. A little history. One of the things, said Don Quixote, that must give the greatest contentment to a virtuous and eminent man is to see, while he is still alive, his good name printed and published in the languages of different peoples. I said good name, for if it were the opposite, no death could be its equal. In the matter of your good reputation and a good name, said the bachelor, your grace alone triumphs over all other knights-errant, for the Moor in his language and the Christian in his were careful to depict very vividly the gallantry of your grace, very great courage in confronting danger, your patience in adversity, your forbearance in the face of misfortunes and wounds, the virtue and modesty of the platonic love of your grace, and my lady Doña Dulcinea of Toboso. Never, said Sancho Panza, have I heard my lady Dulcinea called Doña, just Señora Dulcinea of Toboso, and that's where the history is wrong. That is not an important objection, responded Carrasco. No, of course not, responded Don Quixote. But tell me, Señor Bachelor, which deeds of mine are praised the most in this history? In that regard, responded the bachelor, there are many opinions, just as there are different tastes. Some prefer the adventure of the windmills, which your grace thought were Briareus and giants, others that of the water wheel. One man favors the description of the 2 armies that turned out to be 2 flocks of sheep. The other praises the adventure of the body that was being carried to Segovia for burial. One says that the adventure of the galley slaves is superior to all the rest. Another, that none equals that of the 2 gigantic Benedictines and the dispute with the valiant Basque. Tell me, Señor Bachelor, said Sancho, is the adventure of the Yanguesans mentioned when our good Rocinante took a notion to ask for the moon? The wise man, responded Sanson, left nothing in the inkwell. He says everything and takes note of everything, even the capering that our good Sancho did in the blanket. Even your embarrassing story about the blanket was in the book. In the blanket I wasn't capering, responded Sancho, but I was in the air, and more than I would have liked. It seems to me, said Don Quixote, there is no human history in the world that does not have its ups and downs, especially those that deal with chivalry. They cannot be filled with nothing but successful exploits. Oh, Duddy. Oh, Duddy. What happened with the blanket? Um, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza stayed at an inn, and when they left the inn, Don Quixote refused to pay, and then he just left. Well, Sancho also tried to do the same thing, and what didn't happen with this blanket? He also tried to not pay and be like, well, I'm the squire, I also don't have to pay. And the people of the inn did not take kindly to that, so they wrapped him in a blanket and started tossing him around, like flinging him around and stuff. And Don Quixote didn't realize that this was happening, and then he comes back and like sees it, but doesn't really help him at all or get involved to make it stop. And then at the end of it, Sancho was like, why didn't you help me? Don Quixote was like, I knew you were gonna be fine. So, yeah, Sancho brings up the blanket a lot. And I just think it's so great. I love that he can't get past it. I love it. Because I too probably wouldn't get past being tossed around in a blanket. Even so, responded the bachelor, some people who have read the history say they would have been pleased if its authors had forgotten about some of the infinite beatings given to Señor Don Quixote in various encounters. That's where the truth of the history comes in, said Sancho. They also could have kept quiet about them for the sake of fairness, said Don Quixote, because the actions that do not change or alter the truth of the history do not need to be written if they belittle the hero. By my faith, Aeneas was not as pious as Virgil depicted him, or Ulysses as prudent as Homer describes him. That is true, replied Sanson, but it is one thing to write as a poet, and another to write as a historian. The poet can recount or sing about things not as they were, but as they should have been, and the historian must write about them not as they should have been, but as they were, without adding or subtracting anything from the truth. Well, if this Moorish gentleman is interested in telling the truth, said Sancho, then among all the beatings my master received, you're bound to find mine, because they never took the measure of his grace's shoulders without taking it for my whole body. But there's no reason for me to be surprised, because, as my master himself says, all the members must share in the head's pain. You are very crafty, Sancho, responded Don Quixote. By my faith, you have no lack of memory when you want to remember. When I would like to forget the beatings I've gotten, said Sancho, the welts won't let me, because they're still fresh on my ribs. Be quiet, Sancho, said Don Quixote, and do not interrupt the bachelor, whom I implore to continue telling me what is said about me in this history. And about me, said Sancho. They also say I'm one of the principal personages in it. My mind said the right word, but that is not what is written. They also say I am one of the principal personages in it. Personages, not presonages, Sancho, my friend, said Sanson. Another one who corrects my vocabulary, said Sancho. Well, both of you keep it up, and you'll never finish. As God is my witness, Sancho, responded the bachelor, You are the second person in the history, and there are some who would rather hear you talk than the cleverest person in it, though there are also some who say you were much too credulous when you believed that the governorship of the insula offered to you by Señor Don Quixote here present could be true. There way too many star, just way too many. The sun has not yet gone down, said Don Quixote. And as Sancho grows older, with the experience granted by his years, he will be more skilled and more capable of being a governor than he is now. By God, Señor, said Sancho, the island that I can't govern at the age I am now, I won't be able to govern if I get as old as Methuselah. The trouble is that this insula is hidden someplace. I don't know where. It's not that I don't have the good sense to govern it. Trust in God, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that everything will turn out well, and perhaps even better than you expect. Not a leaf quivers on a tree unless God wills it. That's true, said Sanson. If it is God's will, Sancho will have 1,000 islands to govern, not just one. I have seen some governors, said Sancho, who, in my opinion, don't come up to the sole of my shoe, and even if they're called lordship and are served their food on silver, they aren't governors of insulas, replied Sanson, but of other, more retractable realms. Those who govern insulas have to know grammar, at the very least. I can accept the gram all right, said Sancho, but the mar I won't go near because I don't understand it. But leaving the question of my being a governor in the hands of God, and may he place me wherever he chooses, I say, Señor Bachelor Sanson Carrasco, that it makes me very happy that the author of the history has spoken about me in such a way that the things said about me do not give offense. For by my faith, as a good squire, if things had been said about me that did not suit an old Christian, which is what I am, even the death would have hurt us. That would be performing miracles, responded Sanson. Miracles or no miracles, said Sancho. Each man should be careful how he talks or writes about people, and not put down willy-nilly the first thing that comes into his head. One of the objections people make to the history, said the bachelor, is that its author put into it a novel called The Man Who Was Recklessly Curious, not because it is a bad novel or badly told, but because it is out of place and has nothing to do with the history of his grace, Señor Don Quixote. I love that the bachelor is giving actual criticisms, real life criticisms of the first part to Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Because the insertion of that novel, The Man Who Was Recklessly Curious, was highly criticized. Yeah, it is. It totally is. I knew what you meant, Duddy. It's so beta. Yeah, it is super, super meta. And yeah, it's funny. It's tongue in cheek, and I am enjoying it. Okay. I'll bet, replied Sancho, that the dogson mixed up apples and oranges. Now, I say, said Don Quixote, that the author of my history was no wise man, but an arrogant gossip-monger who, without rhyme or reason, began to write, not caring how it turned out, just like Orbaneja, the painter of Ubeda, who, when asked what he was painting, replied, "Whatever comes out." Perhaps he painted a rooster in such a fashion and so unrealistically that it had to write beside it, in capital letters, "This is a rooster." And that must be how my history is. A commentary will be necessary in order to understand it. Reminds you of a scene in Fargo season 2. I have not seen Fargo. Worth it? It's also funny that they say that a commentary will be necessary in order to understand it because this is riddled in footnotes. Okay, cool. I will put Fargo on my list. Not at all, responded Sanson, because it is so clear that there is nothing in it to cause difficulty. Children look at it, youths read it, men understand it, the old celebrate it, and, in short, it is so popular and so widely read and so well known by every kind of person that as soon as people see a skinny old nag, they say, "There goes Rocinante," and those who have been fondest of reading it are the pages. There is no lord's antechamber where one does not find a copy of Don Quixote. As soon as it is put down, it is picked up again. Some rush at it, and others ask for it. In short, this history is the most enjoyable and least harmful entertainment ever seen, because nowhere in it can one find even the semblance of an untruthful word or a less than Catholic thought. Cervantes did not write the footnotes. No. At least not these. Maybe in the... No, I don't think so. I don't think he ever had footnotes. Of his own doing, anyway. Writing in any other fashion, said Don Quixote, would mean not writing truths, but lies, and historians who make use of lies ought to be burned, like those who make counterfeit money. I do not know what moved the author to resort to other people's novels and stories when there was so much to write about mine. No doubt he must have been guided by the proverb that says, straw or hay, it's the same either way. For the truth is that if he had concerned himself only with my thoughts, my sighs, my tears, my virtuous desires, and my brave deeds, he could have had a volume larger than, or just as large, the collected works of El Tostado. And there's a note after El Tostado, and it says, Alonso de Madrigal, Bishop of Avila, an immensely prolific writer of the 15th century. In fact, as far as I can tell, Senor Bachelor, in order to write histories and books of any kind, one must have great judgment and mature understanding. To say witty things and to write cleverly requires great intelligence. The most perceptive character in a play is the fool, because the man who wishes to seem simple cannot possibly be a simpleton. History is like a sacred thing. It must be truthful, and wherever truth is, there God is. But despite this, there are some who write and toss off books as if they were fritters. There is no book so bad, said the bachelor, that it does not have something good in it. There is no doubt about it, replied Don Quixote. But it often happens that those who had deservedly won and achieved great fame because of their writings lost their fame, or saw it diminished, when they had their works printed. The reason for that, said Sanson, is that since printed works are looked at slowly, their faults are easily seen, and the greater the fame of the authors, the more closely they are scrutinized. Men who are famous for their talent, great poets, eminent historians, are always, or almost always, envied by those particular pleasure and entertainment is judging after people's writings, without ever having brought anything of their own into the light of day. That is not surprising, said Don Quixote, for there are many theologians who are not good in the pulpit, but are excellent at recognizing the lacks or excesses of those who preach. All this is true, Senor Don Quixote, said Carrasco, but I should like those censures to be more merciful and less severe, and not pay so much attention to the motes in the bright sun of the work they criticize. For if aliquando bonus dormitat humoris. They should consider how often he was awake to give a brilliant light to his work with the least amount of shadow possible. And it well may be that what seem defects to them are birthmarks that often increase the beauty of the face where they appear. And so I say that whoever prints a book exposes himself to great danger, since it is utterly impossible to write in a way that will satisfy and please everyone who reads it. And there is a note after Elicon, Eliquando, blah, 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 blah. And it says, a line from Horace's Ars Poetica, from time to time, even Homer nods. The one that tells about me, said Don Quixote, must have pleased very few. Just the opposite is true, since stultorum infinitus est numerus, an infinite number of people have enjoyed the history, though some have found fault and failure in the author's memory, because he forgets to tell who the thief was who stole Sancho's donkey, for it is never stated and can only be inferred from the writing that it was stolen, and soon after that we see Sancho riding on that same donkey, and don't know how it reappears. And there is a note after stultorum, and it says, the number of fools is infinite. And that's so funny that that's also coming in here, because that was included in the footnotes of who stole the donkey. The donkey was taken in this part, in this edition, but has always been here in this edition, and how like people have been confused when reading it. So it's funny that that's also written in here as well as one of the criticisms. They also say that he forgot to put in what Sancho did with the 100 escudos he found in the traveling case in the Sierra Morena, for it is never mentioned again, and there are many who wish to know what he did with them, or how he spent them, for that is one of the substantive points of error in the work. Sancho responded, I, Señor Sanson, am in no condition now to give accounts or accountings. My stomach has begun to flag, and if I don't restore it with a couple of swallows of mellow wine, I'll be nothing but skin and bone. I keep some at home. My missus is waiting for me. When I finish eating, I'll come back and satisfy your grace and anybody else who wants to ask questions about the loss of my donkey or the 100 escudos. And without waiting for a reply or saying another word, he left for his house. Don Quixote asked and invited the bachelor to stay and eat with him. The bachelor accepted. He stayed. A couple of squab were added to the ordinary meal. Chivalry was discussed at the table. Carrasco humored the knight. The banquet ended. They took a siesta. Sancho returned, and their earlier conversation was resumed. End of chapter 3. I think it's funny that Sancho is like, look, I love what you're saying, and I want to know so much more about it, but I am starving. So I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna fill my belly, and then I want to come back, and I'll fill you in on the missing pieces of what happened. And don't say anything without me. And this is such an interesting, like, meta way that Cervantes has been like, yeah, I hear your criticism. I heard it. I get it. I understand. And just like inserting that and like having the characters react to like their history already being written and some parts are missing or some parts are fuzzy and blah blah blah. Like that's such interesting storytelling. I approve. I approve this message. All right, let's do this. Chapter 4. in which Sancho Panza satisfies bachelor Sanson Carrasco with regard to his doubts and questions, with other events worthy of being known and recounted. Sancho came back to Don Quixote's house, and returning to their earlier discussion, he said, "As for what Señor Sanson said about people wanting to know who stole my donkey, and how and when, I can answer by saying that on the same night we were running from the Holy Brotherhood, and entered the Sierra Morena after the misadventurous adventure of the galley slaves, and of the dead man being carried to Segovia, my master and I rode into a stand of trees where my master rested on his lance, and I on my donkey. And battered and tired from our recent skirmishes, we began to sleep as if we were lying on 4 feather beds. I was so sound asleep that whoever the thief was could come up to me and put me on 4 stakes that he propped under the 4 sides of my of my pack saddle, and leave me mounted on them, and take my donkey out from under me without my even knowing it." Yes, airlines, we're gonna give you these pretzels in a moisture-free cabin, and then half an ounce of water to wash them down. Good luck. That is an easy thing to do, and nothing new. The same thing happened to Sacripante when he was at the siege of Albraca. With that same trick, the famous thief Brunello took his horse from between his legs, and there is a note after between his legs, and it says, "This incident appears in Aristosso's Orlando Furioso." Dawn broke, Sancho continued, and as soon as I moved, the stakes gave way and I fell to the ground. I looked for the donkey and didn't see him. Tears filled my eyes, and I began to lament. And if the author of our history didn't put that in, you can be sure he left out something good. After I don't know how many days, we were traveling with the Senora Princess Macomacona. I saw my donkey, and riding him, dressed like a gypsy, was Ginés de Pasamonte, the lying crook that my master and I freed from the chain. "The error doesn't lie there," replied Sanson, "but in the fact that before the donkey appeared, the author says that Sancho was riding on the same animal." "Well, I don't know how to answer that," said Sancho, "except to say that either the historian was wrong or the printer made a mistake." That's so funny. "That must be the case. No doubt about it," said Sanson. "But what happened to the 100 escudos? Are they gone?" "I spent them for myself, and my wife, and my children, and they are the reason my wife patiently puts up with my traveling highways and byways in the service of my master, Don Quixote. If after so much time I came back home without a blanca, and without my donkey, a black future would be waiting for me. If there is any more to know about me, here I am, and I'll answer the king himself in person, and nobody has any reason to worry about whether I kept them or didn't keep them, spent them or didn't spend them. If the beatings I got on these journeys were paid for in money, even if they didn't cost more than 4 maravedis apiece, another 100 escudos wouldn't pay for half of them. So let each man put his hand over his own heart and not start judging white as black and black as white. Each of us is as God made him, and often much worse." "I'll be sure," said Carrasco, "to tell the author of the history that if it has a second printing, he should not forget what our good Sancho has said, for that would elevate it a good half-span higher than it is now." "Is there anything else that needs to be corrected in the book, Señor Bachelor?" asked Don Quixote. "Oh, I'm sure there is," he responded, "but nothing as important as the ones we've already mentioned." "And by any chance," said Don Quixote. Does the author promise a second part? Yes, he does, responded Sanson, but he says he hasn't found it and doesn't know who has it, and so we don't know if it will be published or not. For this reason, and because some people say second parts were never very good, and others say what's been written about Don Quixote is enough, there is some doubt there will be a second part. But certain people who are more jovial than Saturine say, let's have more Quixotices. Let Don Quixote go charging and Sancho Panza keep talking, and whatever else happens will make us happy. Will Jr., hello, good to see you. And what does the author say to all of this? He says, responded Sanson, that as soon as he finds the history, which he is searching for with extraordinary diligence, he will immediately have it printed, for he is more interested in earning his profit than in winning any praise. Sancho responded to this by saying, the author is interested in money and profit? I'd be surprised if he got any, because all he'll do is rush, 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 like a tailor on the night before a holiday, and work done in a hurry is never as perfect as it should be. Let this Moorish gentleman, or whatever he is, pay attention to what he's doing. My master and I will give him such an abundance of adventures, and so many different deeds, that he'll be able to write not just a second part, but 100 more parts. No doubt about it. The good man must think we're asleep here. Well, just let him try to shoo us, and he'll know if we're lame or not. What I can say is that if my master would take my advice, we'd already be out in those fields, righting wrongs and undoing injustices, which is the habit and custom of good knights-errant. No sooner had Sancho said these words than the sound of Rocinante neighing reached their ears. Don Quixote took this as a very good omen, and resolved that in 3 or 4 days he would undertake another sally, and after declaring his intention to the bachelor, he asked his advice as to the direction he should take on his journey. The bachelor responded that, in his opinion, he ought to go to the kingdom of Aragon and the city of Zaragoza, where in a few days they would be holding solemn jousts for the festival of San Jorge, and there he could win fame, vanquishing all the Aragonese knights, which would be the same as vanquishing all the knights in the world. He praised his determination as being most honorable and brave, and warned him to be more cautious about rushing into danger, because his life belonged not to him alone, but to all those who needed him to protect and defend them in their misfortunes. That's exactly what I hate most, Señor Sanson, said Sancho. My master goes charging at 100 armed men like a greedy boy attacking half a dozen melons. Good Lord, Señor Bachelor. There are times to attack and times to retreat, and not everything's charged for Santiago in Spain. There is a note right after that, and it says, the medieval battle cry of Spanish Christians engaged in combat with Muslims. And besides, I've heard it said, I think by my master himself, if I remember correctly, that between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness lies the middle way of valor, and if this is true, I don't want him to run for no reason or attack when the numbers demand something else. But above all, I advise my master that if he wants to take me with him, it has to be on the condition that he'll do all the battles, and I won't be obliged to do anything except look after his person in question of cleanliness and food. As far as this goes, I'll do everything he asks, but to think that I'll raise my sword, even against low-born scoundrels with their caps and axes, is to think something that will never happen. I, Señor Sanson, don't plan to win fame as a valiant man, but as the best and most loyal squire who ever served a knight-errant. And if my master, Don Quixote, as a reward for my many good services, wants to give me one of the many insulas that his grace says are to be found out there, I'll be very happy to accept it. And if he doesn't give it to me, I'm a human being, and a man shouldn't live depending on anybody but God. Besides bread. Besides, bread will taste as good, and maybe even better, whether I'm a governor or not. For all I know, in those governorships the devil could have set a snare for me that will make me stumble and fall and knock out all my teeth. Sancho I was born, and Sancho I planned to die. But even so, if heavens should be so kind as to offer me, without too much trouble or risk, an insula or something else like that, I'm not such a fool that I'd turn it down, because as they say, when they give you a heifer, don't forget to bring a rope. And when good comes along, lock it in your house. You, brother Sancho, said Carrasco, have spoken like a university professor, but still, trust in God and in Señor Don Quixote, who will give you a kingdom, not merely an insula. Whatever it is, it's the same to me, responded Sancho, though I can tell Señor Carrasco that my master won't be tossing that kingdom into a sack with holes in it. I've taken my own pulse, and I'm healthy enough to rule kingdoms and govern insulas, and this is something I've already told my master. Be careful, Sancho, said Sanson, for offices can alter behavior, and it might be that when you are governor, you won't know the mother who bore you. That's something that may apply, responded Sancho, to people of low birth, but not to those who have their souls a little of the spirit of old Christians like me. No. First get to know my character, and then tell me if I could be ungrateful to anybody. God willing, said Don Quixote, we shall see when the governorship comes along, for I seem to see it right before my eyes. Having said this, he asked the bachelor, if he was a poet, to be so kind as to compose a few verses for him that would deal with the farewell he intended to make to his lady Dulcinea of Toboso. And he said that at the beginning of each line he was to place a letter of her name, so that when one reached the last verse and read all the first letters together, it would say Dulcinea of Toboso. Oh, well, thank you so much for the recommendation. I've actually read Dune, so is it cool to make your recommendation the second one, which I do have and has been staring at me on my bookshelf to read? If not, you can totally throw in another recommendation. The bachelor responded that although he was not one of the famous poets of Spain, who, as people said, did not number more than 3.5, he would be sure to write the lines, although he found a great difficulty in their composition, because the number of letters in her name was 17, and if he made 4 Castilian stanzas of 4 octosyllabic lines each, there would be 1 letter too many, and if he made the stanzas of 5 octosyllabic lines each, the ones called décimas or redondillas, there would be 3 letters too few. Despite this, however, he would attempt to somehow shrink 1 letter so that the name Dulcinea of Toboso would fit into 4 Castilian stanzas. And there is a note after redondillas, and it says, in Cervantes' day, the redondilla was a 5-line stanza, and Kieran Baker, thank you so much for the follow. Oh, cool. Okay, the second one is fine. Excellent. Thank you so much. In Cervantes' day, the redondilla was a 5-line stanza, and the décimas was composed of 2 redondillas. There you go. It must fit in, however you do it, said Don Quixote, because if the name is not there to see, patent and obvious, no woman will believe that the verses were written for her. There are so many little digs at the mental abilities of women that it's just too much. It's just too much. Can't stand it. Was that Mario Paint barking? Actually, it's from Undertale. up. I lost my spot. They agreed to this, and to the night's departing in 8 days, Don Quixote asked the bachelor to keep his secret, especially from the priest and Master Nicolas, and from his niece and housekeeper, so that they would not interfere with his honorable and valiant resolve. Carrasco promised he would, and then he took his leave, asking Don Quixote to keep him informed, when possible, of all his successes and failures. And so they said goodbye, and Sancho left to make preparations for their journey. End of chapter 4. Duddy, you're so close. Undertale, Mario Paint, so stinking close. They're basically the same game. Kieran, thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. Excellent. I'm gonna just sneak a couple pretzels. Like, I'm so glad that you can't hear, but my stomach is just screaming at me. So I actually really like the first part of this second part, or what we've read so far of the second part. Just like the meta of it and the commentary is just so funny, and like that type of humor just hits so nice. Please do, Duddy, please do. I'm not gonna stop you. It's so good. Both the music and the pretzel, in case you were wondering. See how long this chapter is. Oh, you have plenty of time. It's much shorter than I thought it was gonna be. Alright. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Concerning the clever and amusing talk that passed between Sancho Panza and his wife, Teresa Panza, and other events worthy of happy memory. Oh, we totally need an, I thought we did. Maybe it's snack? There is a command. There is a snacking command. I just don't remember what it is. When the translator came to write this 5th chapter, he says he thought it was apocryphal, because in it Sancho Panza speaks in a manner different from what one might expect of his limited intelligence, and says things so subtle one would not think it possible that he knew them, but the translator did not wish to omit it for the sake of his professional obligations, and so he continued, saying, Sancho came home so happy and joyful that his wife could see his joy at a distance, much obliged, which obliged her to ask, What's the news, Sancho, my friend, that makes you so happy? To which he responded, My wife. If it were God's will, I'd be delighted not to be as happy as I appear. And there is a note all the way back when it says, when the translator, and the note says, the original by Cid Hamate Benengeli is in Arabic. In part 1, a translator was hired in the market in Toledo. His translation is the history of Don Quixote, described by the bachelor in part 2. You'd be delighted. There we go. Okay. Husband, I don't understand you, she replied, and I don't know what you mean when you say you'd be delighted. If it were God's will not to be happy, I may be a fool, but I don't know how anybody can be happy not to be happy. Look, Teresa, responded Sancho, I am happy because I've decided to serve my master, Don Quixote, again, for he wants to leave a third time to seek adventures, and I'll leave with him again, because of my need and the hope which makes me happy. of thinking that I may find another 100 escudos like the ones that have already been spent, though it makes me sad to have to leave you and my children. And if it was God's will to give me food with my feet dry and in my own house, not leading me through wastelands and crossroads, he would do it at very little cost, and just by wanting it. Then, of course, my happiness would be firmer and truer, for what I feel now is mixed with the sorrow of leaving you. And so, I was right to say that I would be delighted if it was God's will not to be happy. Look, Sancho, replied Teresa, ever since you became a knight-errant's servant, your talk is so roundabout nobody can understand you. It's enough if God understands me, my wife, responded Sancho, for he understands all things, and say no more about it for now. You should know, Teresa, that you have to take special care of the donkey for the next 3 days, so that he's ready to carry weapons. Double his feed and look over the pack saddle, and the rest of the trappings. We're not going to a wedding, but to travel the world and have our battles with giants, dragons, and monsters, and hear their hisses, roars, bellows, and shrieks, and none of that would matter very much if we didn't have to contend with Yangesens and enchanted Moors. So, I know that this movie came out forever ago, but every single time I read the words, my wife, I think of it in the Borat voice every single time, without fail. That's what I'm thinking. So, if you too were thinking that, we're on the same wavelength, and that's why we're friends. I do believe, my husband, that squires errant don't get their bread for nothing, and so I'll keep praying that our Lord delivers you soon from so much misfortune. I'll tell you, Teresa, responded Sancho, that if I didn't expect to be the governor of an insula before too much more time goes by, I'd fall down dead right here. Not that, my husband, said Teresa. Let the chicken live, even if she has the pip. May you live, and let the devil take all the governorship there are in the world. You came out of your mother's womb without a governorship, and you've lived until now without a governorship, and when it pleases God, you'll go, or they'll carry you to the grave without a governorship. Many people in the world live without governorship, and that doesn't make them give up or not be counted among the living. The best sauce in the world is hunger, and since poor people have plenty of that, they always eat with great pleasure. But look, Sancho, if you happen to find yourself a governor somewhere, don't forget about me and your children. Remember that Sanchico is already 15, and he ought to go to school if his uncle the abbot is going to bring him into the church. And don't forget that your daughter, Mari Sancha, won't die if we marry her. She keeps dropping hints that she wants a husband so much as you want to be a governor, and when all is said and done, a daughter's better off badly married than happily kept. By my faith, Teresa, responded Sancho, if God lets me have any kind of governorship, I'll marry Mary Sancha so high up that nobody will be able to reach her unless they call her Señora. Don't do that, Sancho, responded Teresa. She should marry an equal. That's the best thing. If you raise her from wooden clogs to cork-soled mules, from homespun petticoats to silken hoop-skirts and dressing-gowns, from you, Marica, to Doña, and my lady, the girl won't know who she is, and wherever she turns she'll be 1,000 mistakes and show that the threads of her cloth are rough and coarse. Quiet, fool, said Sancho. She just needs to practice for 2 or 3 years, and then the nobility and the dignity will be a perfect fit. If not, what difference does it make? Let her be my lady, and it won't matter. Be content with your station, responded Teresa, and don't try to go to a higher one. Remember the proverb that says, take your neighbor's son, wipe his nose, and bring him into your house. Sure, it would be very nice to marry our Maria to some wretch of a count or a gentleman who might take a notion to insult her and call her lowborn, the daughter of peasants and spinners. Not in my lifetime, my husband. I didn't bring up my daughter for that. You bring the money, Sancho, and leave her marrying to me. There's Lope Tocho, the son of Juan Tocho, a sturdy, healthy boy, and we know him. And I know for a fact that he doesn't dislike the girl. He's our equal, and she would make a good marriage with him. And we'd always see her, and we'd all be together, parents and children, grandchildren and in-laws, and the peace and blessings of God would be with us. So don't go marrying her into those courts and great palaces where they don't understand her, and she won't understand herself. Come here, you imbecile, you troublemaker. Such cute little pet names, replied Sancho. Why do you want to stop me now? And for good reason. And for no good reason. From marrying my daughter to somebody who will give my grandchildren they'll call lord and lady. Look, Teresa, I've always heard the old folks say that if you don't know how to enjoy good luck when it comes, you shouldn't complain if it passes you by. It wouldn't be a good idea, now that it's come knocking, to shut the door in its face. You should let the favorable wind that's blowing carry us along. Okay, so I have to agree with the translator note. This does not sound like the way that Sancho was talking like 2 pages ago. And it is like a complete shift in character almost for him to be talking this way rather than the way he was before. So I understand the criticism. This manner of speaking, and what Sancho says below, is why the translator of his history considered this chapter apocryphal. I do this every single time where I have like an insert or a note or to be like, oh, hey, remember this happened over here. And then Cervantes comes in and is like, bop, 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 and just says basically exactly what I just said. So that's cool. Don't you think, you ignorant woman, Sancho continued, that it will be good for me to come into some profitable governorship that will take us out of poverty? Let Sancha marry the man I chose, and you'll see how they start calling you Doña Teresa Panza, and you'll sit in church on a rug with pillows and tapestries, in spite of and regardless of all the gentlewomen in town. But no, not you. You'd rather always stay the same, never changing, like a figure in a wall hanging. And we're not talking about this anymore. Sanchica will be a countess, no matter what you say. Do you hear what you're saying, husband? Responded Teresa. Well, even so, I'm afraid that if my daughter becomes a countess, it will be her ruin. You'll do whatever you want, whether you make her a duchess or a princess, but I can tell you it won't be with my agreement or consent. Sancho, I've always been in favor of equality, and I can't stand to see somebody putting on airs for no reason. They baptized me Teresa, a plain and simple name without any additions or decorations or trimmings of dons or doñas. My father's name was Cascajo? Cascajo? Something like that. And because I'm your wife, they call me Teresa Panza, though they really ought to call me Teresa Cascajo. I just don't know where to put the accent on that. Apologies. But where laws go, kings follow, and I'm satisfied with this name without anybody adding on a doña that weighs so much I can't carry it. And I don't want to give people who see me walking around dressed in a countess or governorish way a chance to say, look at the airs that sow is putting on. There is a note after by where laws of kings follow, and it says, Teresa has the proverb backwards. It should be, where kings go, laws follow. Yesterday, she was busy pulling on a tuft of flax for spinning, and she went to mass and covered her head with her skirts instead of a mantilla. And today, she has a hoop skirt and brooches and airs, and if We didn't know who she was. If God preserves my seven senses, or five, or however many I have, I don't intend to let anybody see me in a spot like that. You, my husband, go and be a governor or an insular and put on all the airs you like. I swear on my mother's life that my daughter and I won't set foot out of our village. To keep her chaste, break her leg and keep her in the house. For a chaste girl, work is her fiesta. You go with your Don Quixote and have your adventures, and leave us with our misfortunes, for God will set them right if we're good. I certainly don't know who gave him a Don, because his parents and grandparents never had one. Now I'll say, replied Sancho, that you must have an evil spirit in that body of yours. God save you, woman. What a lot of things you're strung together willy-nilly. What do cascajo, brooches, proverbs, and putting on airs have to do with what I'm saying? Come here, you simple, ignorant woman, and can call you that because you don't understand my words, and try to run away from good luck. If I had said that my daughter ought to throw herself off a tower or go roaming around the way the Infanta Doña Urraca wanted to, you'd be right not to go along with me. But if in two shakes and in the wink of an eye I dress her in a doña and put a my lady on her back for you, and take her out of the dirt and put her under a canopy and up on a pedestal in a drawing room with more velvet cushions than Moors in the line of the almohadas of Morocco, why don't you consent and want what I want? And there are two notes, one after Doña Urraca, and it says, the allusion is to a ballad about Doña Urraca's desire to go wandering. And then the second one is after Almohadas of Morocco, and it says, Sancho confuses almohada, the Spanish for pillow or cushion, and almohade, the name of the Islamic dynasty that ruled North Africa in Spain in the 12th century. Easy to confuse, I get it. Do you know why, Sancho? responded Teresa. Responded Teresa. Because of the proverb that says, whoever tries to conceal you reveals you. Nobody does more than glance at the poor, but they look closely at the rich. If a rich man was once poor, that's where the whispers and rumors begin, and the wicked rumors of gossip who crowd the streets like swarms of bees. Look, Teresa, responded Sancho, and listen to what I tell you now. Maybe you haven't heard it in all of the days of your life, and what I'm saying now isn't something I made up on my own. Something I plan to say to you are the judgments of the priest who preached in this village during Lent last year. And if I remember correctly, he said that things which are present and before our eyes appear are and remain in our memory much more clearly and sharply than things in the past. All the words that Sancho says here are the second of his statements that cause the translator to consider this chapter apocryphal, for they far exceed the capacity of Sancho, who continued saying, this accounts for the fact that when we see someone finely dressed and wearing rich clothes and with a train of servants, it seems that some force moves and induces us to respect him, although at that moment our memory recalls the lowliness in which we once saw the person, and that shame, whether of poverty or low birth, is in the past and no longer exists. And what is only what we see in front of us in the present. And if this man, whose earlier lowliness has been erased by the good fortune, there were the very words that the priest said, that has raised him to prosperity, is well-mannered, generous, and courteous with everyone, and does not compete with those who have been noble since ancient times, you can be sure, Teresa, that nobody will remember what he was, but will revere him for what he is, unless they are envious, and no good fortune is safe from envy. I don't understand you, my husband, replied Teresa. So do what you want, and don't give me any more headaches with your long speeches and fine words. And if you've resolved to do what you say, resolved is what you should say, Teresa, said Sancho, not revolved. Don't start an argument with me, Sancho, responded Teresa. I talk as God wills, and let's stick to the subject. I say that if you're determined to have a governorship, you should take your son, Sanchico, along so you can teach him how to be a governor. It's a good thing for sons to inherit and learn the trades of their fathers. As soon as I have the governorship, said Sancho, I'll send for him post-haste, and I'll send you some money. I'll have plenty, because there are always plenty of people who lend money to governors when they don't have any. And be sure to dress him so that you hide what he is, and he looks like what he'll become. You just send the money, said Teresa, and I'll dress him up as nice as you please. So then we agree, said Sancho, that our daughter will be a countess. The day I see her a countess, responded Teresa, will be the day I'll have to bury her. But again, I say that you should do whatever you want. Women are born with the obligation to obey their husbands, even if they're fools. And at this she began to cry, as piteously as if she already saw Sanchica dead and buried. Sancho consoled her, saying that even if he had to make her a countess, he would delay it as long as he could. This ended their conversation, and Sancho returned to see Don Quixote and arrange for their departure. And that is the end of chapter 5. Interesting. Okay, so all of the notes that I told you about the translator, they're all in parentheses. They're not footnotes, they're not italicized, nothing like that. They're all in parentheses, which is interesting. It's a choice. And yeah, I'm wondering, bringing out the camera trick. I know, so this whole time, Sancho is the one who is being corrected of words that he's saying wrong, that he's mixing up words together. I mean, it just happened when he mixed up pillow and that one person, I forgot his name already. The Islamic dynasty that ruled North America and Spain, doing it all the time. And then to see him correct his wife is also interesting. And I'm just wondering. I have thoughts. They're probably wrong, but it's fine. So, is this establishing a hierarchy of sorts? So, Don Quixote is Sancho's master, and then Sancho's master is. Oh, and then Sancho is higher than his wife. And I just think that's interesting. Yeah, Sancho is definitely picking up some bad habits. And the way that he's talking to his wife is also mirroring how sometimes Don Quixote talks to him and is just impatient with him when he mixes things up or thinks his ideas aren't gonna work or aren't good or whatever it is. And the fact that Sancho is I'm gonna be the governor and this is gonna happen, blah blah blah, is the same resolve that Don Quixote has with being a knight-errant and, having his kingdom. And he's like, I'm a knight-errant. We are going to right wrongs. We're going to do all of these things. And then Sancho's wife is questioning almost. And then Sancho questions Don Quixote. Yeah, he's projecting his frustrations. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that, what is it? That one graphic that you see where some guy is getting yelled at work. So then he goes home and he yells at his partner, and then his partner yells at the kid, and then the kid yells at the dog, and it just, oh jeez, I got really worked up there. It just goes down the line. Mm-hmm. The poor wife definitely did not sign up for this. She thought that she was just marrying some peasant like herself and that everything would be fine. Her and her daughters would just be living or and her sons would just be living this life, this quiet life, and then all of a sudden Sancho is like, we're gonna do wild things. And I think it's so interesting that like Teresa doesn't want any of this. She's like, no, I don't want to be a governess. I just want to be here. She did not. No. Not originally, but now it's like, okay, go do your adventures. It seems like she's saying like, go do your adventures, get it out of your system, and then come back. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. That's what it seems like. But no, like the first time he left, he just like left. Yes. Yeah, Duddy. He was married and had kids before he was a squire. Mm-mm. You're doing good. You're reading your context clues very well. hmm Yep, married, had kids before he became a squire. And I don't think we knew, or maybe we did, and I just don't remember, but I feel like I didn't know that he was married with a family until like further into their adventure, and it's just like, why are you leaving your family? What are you doing? Does your family know you're here? Yeah, and he's not the peasant that she married. Times have changed. Times have changed. Ooh, tempting. Okay, we will do one more. We will do one more chapter. Right, right. Why is it always the bad characteristics that people latch onto and take? Take the good ones next time. All right, last chapter of the night. Chapter 6. Regarding what transcribed. Nope, we're going to start that over. Chapter 6. Regarding what transpired between Don Quixote and his niece and housekeeper, which is the one of the most important chapters in the entire history. You're right, you're totally right, Duddy. They are the easier ones to mimic for sure. I'm interested that this is the most important chapter in the entire history. While Sancho Panza and his wife, Teresa Cascajo, were having the incongruous talk that has just been related, Don Quixote's niece and housekeeper were not idle. 1,000 indications had led them to infer that their uncle and master wished to leave for the third time and return to the practice of what was, to their minds, the calamitous chivalry, and they attempted by all means possible to dissuade him from so wicked a thought, that it was all preaching in the desert and hammering on cold iron. Even so, in one of the many exchanges they had with him, the housekeeper said, "The truth is, Señor, that if your grace doesn't keep your feet firmly on the ground and stay quietly in your house and stop wandering around the mountains and the valleys like a soul in torment looking for things that are called adventures but that I call misfortunes, then I'll have to cry and complain to God and the king and ask them for a remedy." To which Don Quixote responded, "Housekeeper, I do not know how God will respond to your complaints, or his majesty either. I know only that if I were king, I should excuse myself from responding to the countless importunate requests presented to me each day, one of the greatest burdens borne by kings, among so many others, is the obligation to listen to all petitions and respond to all of them. Consequently, I should not want my affairs to trouble him in any way." To which the housekeeper said, "Tell us, Señor, aren't there knights in his majesty's court?" "Yes," responded Don Quixote, "quite a few, and it is fitting that there should be, as in adornment to the greatness of princes and to display the stateliness of kings." "Well then, couldn't your grace," she replied, "be one of those who stay put to serve their king and lord in court?" "Look, my friend," responded Don Quixote, "not all knights can be courtiers, and not all courtiers can or should be knights-errant. There are to be some of each in the world. And although we are all knights, there is a vast difference between us. Courtiers, without leaving their chambers or passing beyond the threshold of the court, travel the entire world by looking at a map, not spending a blanca, or suffering heat or cold, hunger or thirst. But we, the true knights-errant, measure the earth with our own feet, exposed to the sun, the cold, the wind, and the inclemencies of heaven, both night and day, on foot and on horseback. And we know our enemies not only in portraits, but in their actual persons. And no matter the danger, and regardless of the occasion, we do battle with them, not worrying about trifles or the laws governing duels, whether one combatant has or does not have a shorter lance or sword, or has on his person a relic or some hidden deception, or if the sun is to be apportioned or slashed to bits, and other ceremonies of this nature that are used to private duels between individuals, which you do not know about, but I do. There's a note after slashed to bits, and it says, apportioning the sun, partir el sol, was the arrangement of combatants in a tourney so that the sun would not shine in anyone's eyes. Slashing to bits is Cervantes' wordplay. And you should also know something else. The good knight-errant may see 10 giants whose heads not only touch the clouds, but go above them, each with legs that are 2 immense towers, and whose arms resemble the masts of large and powerful ships, each eye like a huge mill wheel, burning hotter than a glass furnace. Yet he must not be afraid in the slightest, but with a gallant air and an intrepid heart he must charge and attack them, and, if possible, defeat and rout them in an instant, even if they are armed with the shell of a certain fish that are, they say, harder than diamonds, and instead of swords they carry sharp knives of damascene steel, or clubs studded with steel spikes, which I have seen more than a few times. I have said all this, my dear housekeeper, so that you may see the difference between one kind of knight and another, and it would be right and proper for every prince to esteem more highly the second, or I should say, the first kind of knights-errant, for as we read in their histories, some among them have been the salvation of not only one kingdom, but many. "Ah, señor," said his niece, "your grace should remember that everything you say about knights-errant is invention and lies, and of each their histories, if it isn't burned, deserves to wear a San Benito, or some other sign that it has been recognized as the infamous ruination of virtuous customs." There is a note after San Benito, and it says, the stigmatizing hood and robe that those accused by the Inquisition were obliged to wear. "By the God who sustains me," said Don Quixote, "if you were not my lawful niece, the daughter of my own sister, I should punish you so severely for the blasphemy you have uttered, that it would not be heard all over the world. How is it possible that a mere slip of a girl, who barely knows how to manage 12 lace bobbins, can dare to speak against and censor the histories of the knights-errant? What would Señor Amadis have said if he heard this? But most certainly he would have pardoned you, because he was the most humble and courteous knight of his time, and a great defender of damsels. But others could have hurt you, and it would not have gone so well for you, for not all of them are courteous or well-behaved. Some are discourteous cowards. Not all those called knights are knights through and through. Some are gold, others alchemical, and all appear to be knights, but not all can pass a test by touchstone." And there is a note after touchstone, and it says, "A kind of black stone that once was used to test the purity of gold or silver by rubbing the stone with the metal and analyzing the streak left behind." There are base-born men desperate to seem knights, and high-born knights who appear ready to die in order to seem base. The former rise up through ambition or virtue, the latter descend through idleness or vice, and it is necessary for us to use our knowledge and discernment to distinguish between those two kinds of knights, so similar in names, so dissimilar in actions. Lord save me, said the niece. Your grace knows so much that in an emergency you could stand in the pulpit or preach in the streets, and despite this, you have been struck by such great blindness and such obvious foolishness that you try to make us believe that you are valiant when you are old, and strong when you are ailing, that you right wrongs when you are stooped by age, and most of all, that you are a knight when you are not, because though gentlefolk may be knights, poor men are never— You are certainly correct in what you say, my dear niece, responded Don Quixote, and I could tell you things about lineage that would astonish you, but I shall not say them in order not to mix the human with the divine. Look, my friends, there are 4 kinds of lineage, and listen carefully. All the lineages in the world can be reduced to these. Some had humble beginnings, and extended and expanded until they reached the heights of greatness. Others had noble beginnings, and preserved them, and still preserve them, and maintain them just as they were. Still, others may have had noble beginnings, but, like pyramids, they tapered to a point, having diminished and annihilated their origins until they ended in nothingness, as the tip of the pyramid is nothing compared to its base or bottom. Finally, there are others, and these are the majority, that did not have a good beginning, or a reasonable middle, and therefore in the end they have no name, like the lineages of ordinary plebeians. An example of the first, those who had a humble beginning, and rose to the greatness they now possess, is the Ottoman dynasty, which began with a humble, low-born shepherd, and rose to the pinnacle that we see today. Of the second kind of lineage, which began in greatness and persevered and preserved it without increasing it, an example would be the many princes by inheritance who maintain their greatness without increasing or decreasing it, and peacefully stay within the borders of their states. Of those who began great and ended in a point, there are thousands of examples. All the pharaohs and Ptolemies of Egypt, the Caesars of Rome, and the entire horde, if that name can be given to them, of countless princes, monarchs, lords, Medes, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and barbarians. All these lineages and nobilities, and those who originated them, have ended in a point, in nothingness, for it would not be possible now to find any of their descendants, and if we did, they would be in a low and humble state. Regarding the plebeian lineage, I have nothing to say, except that they serve only to increase the number of the living, and their greatness does not merit any other fame or praise. From all that I have said, I want you to infer, you foolish woman, that the confusion surrounding lineages is great, and the only ones that appear distinguished and illustrious are those that display those qualities in their virtue, and in the wealth and generosity of their nobles. I said virtue, wealth, and generosities, because the great man who is vicious will be extremely vicious, and the close-fisted rich man will be a miserly beggar, for the person who possesses wealth is not made happy by having it, but by spending it, and not spending it haphazardly, but in knowing how to spend it well. An impoverished knight has no way to show he is a knight except through his virtue, by being affable, well-mannered, courteous, civil, and diligent, not proud, arrogant, or prone to gossip, and above all, by being charitable, for with 2 maravedis given joyfully to a poor man, he will show that he is as generous as the man who gives alms to the loud ringing bells. No one who sees a knight adorned with these virtues can fail to judge and consider him to be of good breeding, even if he does not know him, and he is not being so would be remarkable. Praise was always the reward of virtue, and virtuous men cannot avoid being praised. There are 2 roads, my dears, which men can take to become rich and honored. One is that of letters, the other that of arms. I have more arms than letters, and my inclination is toward arms, for I was born under the influence of the planet Mars, and so I am almost compelled to follow his path, and follow it I must, despite the rest of the world. It will be useless to try to persuade me that I do not wish what heaven wishes, fortune ordains, reason demands, and above all, what my will desires. For, knowing as I do the countless travails that accompany knight-errantry, I also know the infinite benefits that can be attained through it. I know that the path of virtue is very narrow, and the road of a wickedness is broad and spacious. I know that their endings and conclusions are different, because the expansive, spacious road of wickedness ends in death, and the road of virtue so narrow and difficult ends in life. Not the life that ends, but life everlasting. And I know, as our great Castilian poet says, that along this harsh, rock-strewn terrain we climb, to the peak, high seat of immortality, never reached if these rigors are declined. There is a note after Castilian poets, and it says, Garcilaso de la Vega, 1503 to 1536. The great Renaissance poet perfected the Petrarchan style in Spanish. Oh, woe is me, said the niece. My uncle's a poet, too. He knows everything, he understands everything, and I'd wager that if he wanted to be a mason, he'd know how to build a house as well as a cage. I promise you, my niece, responded Don Quixote, that if these chivalric ideas did not carry with them all my thoughts, there would be nothing I should not make and no curiosity my hands would not create, especially cages and toothpicks. Oh, that Captain Hardship. Good to see you. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, and when they asked who was there, Sancho Panza responded that it was he. And as soon as the housekeeper learned who it was, she ran to hide, not wanting to see him because she despised him so much. The niece opened the door, and Sancho's master came to greet him with open arms, and the two men shut themselves away in Don Quixote's room, where they had another conversation, just as good as the previous one. And that is the end of chapter 6. And that's going to be where we end tonight, actually. Perfect timing. So we are about to start chapter 7. We are on page 498. This is our visual progress. Not too shabby. Not too shabby. All right, so that last chapter, basically just the niece trying to get him to not leave. And Don Quixote being like, I have to leave. Yes, I am smart, but I was born under the Mars planet and I need to follow this. Blah blah blah. Basically. Don Quixote really likes to go off on long tangents. Oh, that's so good. Carrie Fisher finally has her star on the Walk of Fame. I haven't seen that. I didn't see that news. That's so exciting. That makes me happy. Oh, that makes me really happy. It's about time. I'm surprised that she didn't already, actually, now that you say that. Mm. Mm-mm-mm. And on this Star Wars Day, you love to see it. They just honored her with it today. So good. So good. Thanks for sharing. All right. That's going to be it for today. We will continue next week. It'll be great. So I hope to see you then. If I don't, I hope to see you even sooner. Um, as always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you very soon.